Have you ever heard of a woman so fierce, so strong, that she single-handedly took down an entire clan of mythical creatures? A woman whose name would become a legend, whispered in fear and awe across the lands. This is the story of the Babaeng Panday, a fearless warrior, whose courage and skill would lead her to face the darkness in a battle that could change the fate of an entire community. But this wasn't just any fight, this was a war against creatures that should not exist, beings who roam the earth in the shadows, feeding on the very fear they invoke. This is the story of a woman who rose up against the aswang, a creature that has haunted Filipino folklore for generations. In the quiet, fog-covered mountains of a forgotten province, a small town lived in constant terror. The air was thick with unease, for every night brought the whispers of people disappearing without trace, their families left in agony, wondering if they would ever see their loved ones again. The aswang, a creature known for its deadly hunger, had long been a source of fear, but something had changed. These creatures weren't just taking lives, they were now targeting an entire bloodline, a line of warriors who had sworn to protect the village. One year the village's defenders fell, leaving the people vulnerable to the dark forces that threatened to swallow them whole. Enter the Babaeng Panday, a woman with a history as hard as steel. She wasn't born into a family of warriors, but the blood of heroes ran through her veins. Her father, a skilled blacksmith, forged weapons so powerful that they were said to be enchanted. Her mother, a healer, instilled in her the strength to stand up for those who couldn't protect themselves. With nothing but her resolve and the weapon her father had forged, she took it upon herself to protect her people from the threat of the aswang. But this wasn't going to be an easy fight. The aswang she was facing weren't like any ordinary creature. These weren't the nightmarish figures with claws and fangs that could be slain with a single strike. No, these aswang were smarter, more cunning, and had terrifying connection to the dark magic that had been passed down through generations. They weren't just lurking in the night, they were in plain sight, hidden within the very walls of the village, posing as humans, biding their time until the moment was right to strike. The Babaeng Panday knew that defeating them would take more than just strength. She had to outsmart them. She had to delve into the ancient stories, the forgotten rites, and the very magic that gave the aswang its power. Armed with her father's sword and a heart full of rage for what had been taken from her, she began her journey into the heart of darkness. But the deeper she went, the more she uncovered about the true nature of the aswang, and the more she realized that this wasn't just a fight for survival. It was a battle for the very soul of her people. The first night she faced one of the aswang, the battle was brutal. The creature, a hulking figure with eyes as red as blood, lunged at her with a ferocity that would have broken any ordinary warrior. But she was no ordinary warrior. With her blade, she parried the beast's strikes, her every move a dance of defiance. But even as she struck the creature down, she knew this was only the beginning. More were out there, and they were coming for her next. The villagers began to notice something strange as well. There was a shift in the air. The aswang seemed to be getting stronger, their attacks more frequent, and their presence more undeniable. With each death, the creature's power grew. But what none of them knew was that the Babaeng Panday was not only fighting to save her village. She was fighting to uncover a secret, one that could change everything. The truth about the aswang was far darker than anyone had imagined. The aswang weren't just mindless beasts, they were an ancient clan, bound in blood and magic, and they had a purpose that went beyond mere destruction. The Babaeng Panday was beginning to realize that her fight was not just a personal vendetta, it was part of a much larger, much older conflict. And as she delved deeper into their twisted world, she began to see that perhaps the Aswang had a reason for what they were doing. Perhaps the lines between good and evil weren't as clear-cut as she had once believed. But as she uncovered more, she discovered that she might not be alone in this battle. Others, dark figures from the shadows, had also taken up arms. Friends and enemies, both human and not, were making their moves, and the fate of the entire village hung in the balance. In the quiet moments before dawn, as she sharpened her sword, she knew the worst was yet to come. And as the first whispers of a new enemy echoed through the mountains, the Babaeng Panday was faced with an impossible choice. Would she continue the fight, risking everything she loved? Or would the Aswang claim victory, and with it, the future of her people? To be continued. The first light of dawn barely touched the mountaintops when the Babaeng Panday set out again, her sword strapped firmly at her side, her mind a whirlwind of unanswered questions. The night's battle had left her with more than just physical wounds. Her heart, too, carried the weight of what she had learned. The Aswang were not merely creatures of darkness and hunger, they were part of something much older, a bloodline that stretched far back into the depths of time. It was said that the Aswang had been born from the very earth itself, created as guardians of ancient, forbidden knowledge. But this was no comforting allegory. The truth was far darker than anyone had ever dared to imagine. As she trekked deeper into the forest, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. The wind rustled the trees above her, but the silence around her was unnatural, almost suffocating. She stopped, eyes scanning the shadows. For a moment, she thought she saw a figure dart between the trees, but when she blinked, it was gone. Her senses had always been sharp, but after her encounter with the Aswang, they seemed heightened, more attuned to the unseen. The path ahead grew steeper, and the fog began to thicken, wrapping around her like a shroud. She had been to these woods before, but they had never felt this alive. Her footsteps echoed eerily in the stillness, as if the very ground beneath her was holding its breath. Somewhere in the distance, she could hear the faintest sound, footsteps, quick and deliberate, though she couldn't tell if they were her own or something else. She tightened her grip on the hilt of her sword. This was no ordinary journey. She wasn't just heading into the unknown, she was heading into a place where time and reality seemed to blur, a place where the boundaries between the living and the dead were thin. The villagers had always spoken of this forest with a mixture of reverence and fear. They called it the Forest of Echus, a place where the souls of those long lost to the Aswang still wandered, trapped between worlds. Some said the forest itself was cursed, that the trees were infused with the spirits of those who had fallen victim to the creature's hunger. Others whispered that the Aswang had once called this forest home, and their presence still lingered in the shadows, watching, waiting. It was here, deep within the heart of the forest, that she hoped to uncover the answers she desperately sought. It was here that the final piece of the puzzle, the key to understanding the Aswang, could be found. But the deeper she went, the more she realized that what she sought might not be something she was prepared to face. After hours of walking, she finally reached the clearing that had once been a sanctuary. Her father had brought her here as a child, telling her that this was where their ancestors had forged their first weapons, where they had stood against the ancient evils that once roamed the land. The clearing was surrounded by towering trees, their trunks thick and gnarled, twisted by time and weather. At the center of the clearing stood an altar, a stone slab engraved with symbols she could barely recognize. She knelt beside it, tracing the markings with her fingers. These symbols were older than the village, older than even the Aswang themselves. They spoke of a pact made long ago, a bond between the people of the village and the creatures that now sought to destroy them. She felt chill run down her spine as the truth began to settle in. The Aswang were not just mindless predators, they were once protectors, guardians of a secret so powerful, so dangerous, that it had been locked away for centuries. And now, they were back, angry and vengeful, because that secret had been disturbed. The village, her people, had unknowingly broken the pact that had kept the Aswang at bay for generations. The ritual her ancestors had performed to bind the creatures to their land had been forgotten, and the balance had been tipped. Now, the Aswang sought retribution. They were not just after vengeance, they were after something far worse, the ancient power hidden beneath the earth, something her father had never spoken of, something she was only beginning to understand. As she stood up from the altar, a sudden noise snapped her back to reality. She spun around, her hand on the hilt of her sword. Out of the fog, a figure emerged, a woman, tall and shrouded in black, her face hidden beneath a hood. The air around her seemed to warp, as though the very fabric of space bent to her presence. "You're not supposed to be here," the woman said, her voice low, almost a whisper, yet it carried with it an undeniable authority. "You seek answers, but not all truths are meant to be found." The Babaeng Panday tensed, eyes narrowing. "Who are you?" she demanded. "What do you know about the Aswang?" The woman did not answer immediately. Instead, she stepped forward, her movements graceful but deliberate. "You think you understand the Aswang? You think you can stop them? You have no idea what you're dealing with." The Babaeng Panday felt the weight of the woman's words, a cold dread creeping up her spine. For the first time, doubt began to seep into her thoughts. Was she truly ready for what lay ahead? Could she face not only the Aswang but whatever ancient force had awakened them? Before she could speak, the woman's eyes flicked to the shadows behind her. A movement, too quick to fully grasp, darted across the clearing. The Aswang were closer than she thought. The woman's lips curled into a half-smile, though it was not one of reassurance. "You've already come too far," she said, her voice tinged with something dark and knowing. "Now, there's no turning back." And with that, the figure disappeared into the mist, leaving the Babaeng Panday alone, her heart racing, knowing that the next battle was going to be the most dangerous yet. To be continued. The moment the woman vanished into the mist, the Babaeng Panday stood motionless, her breath shallow and quick, her mind racing. The air around her seemed to thicken, pressing against her chest, as if the forest itself had drawn closer, suffocating her with its secrets. She knew the Aswang were near, she could feel them, lurking in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to strike. But there was something else, something unsettling about the woman's words. "You've already come too far. Now, there's no turning back." Those words echoed in her mind, gnawing at her like an itch she couldn't scratch. What did she mean? Had the woman been a warning? Or was she merely playing some twisted game, toying with her fear? The Babaeng Panday gripped her sword tighter, steeling herself against the uncertainty. She had come too far already. There was no turning back now. The forest around her was eerily still, the usual sounds of birds and insects absent. It felt as though the very world had held its breath in anticipation. Then, from the corner of her eye, she saw it, a flash of movement between the trees. Her instincts kicked in immediately, and she spun around, sword raised. But it was only a shadow, a figment of her imagination. She exhaled slowly, forcing herself to calm down. The Aswang were tricksters. They could play with the mind just as easily as they could tear through flesh. She needed to focus. She had come to the clearing to find answers, and she couldn't afford to let fear cloud her judgment. The altar in the center of the clearing was still there, untouched, its strange symbol staring back at her like the eyes of a forgotten god. She knelt before it again, her fingers brushing the stone, trying to make sense of the markings. She could feel something pulsing beneath her fingertips, a faint vibration that seemed to hum with ancient power. This altar wasn't just a place of worship, it was seal, a barrier that had kept the Aswang and their dark magic contained for centuries. And now, that barrier was crumbling. Her thoughts were interrupted by a voice, distant but clear, like the rustle of leaves in a storm. "They know you are here." The word sent chill down her spine. She turned quickly, searching the clearing for the source of the voice, but saw nothing. Her heart pounded in her chest as the words repeated, growing louder, more insistent. "They know. You cannot hide from them." The voice seemed to be coming from everywhere at once, seeping into the very air around her. She stood up, eyes darting around in a panic. The Aswang were closing in. She could feel their presence, like dark cloud gathering above her head, pressing down, suffocating her. She reached for the blade at her side, her fingers trembling. She had been trained for this, she told herself. She had fought before. But this was different. The Aswang weren't just creatures to be slain, they were ancient, tied to a magic that was beyond her understanding. And if she couldn't stop them now, they would consume everything she had ever known. Suddenly, there was a sound, a low growl, barely audible, coming from the trees behind her. She whirled around, heart racing, but it was too late. From the shadows, they emerged. Dark figures with glowing eyes, their bodies cloaked in the tattered remnants of human form the Aswang had come for her. But there was something different about them now. They weren't the mindless beasts she had faced before. These creatures seemed deliberate. They moved with purpose, each one more like shadow than beast, their forms shifting and warping as they came closer. She could see the hunger in their eyes, but there was something else there too, a quiet intelligence, deep, unsettling awareness. They weren't just after her blood. They were after something more. The Babaeng Panday took a step back, her grip tightening on her sword as the creatures encircled her. She could feel the weight of their gaze on her, the silence pressing in on all sides. They weren't attacking yet. It was as if they were waiting, gauging her strength, testing her resolve. "Lele," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the sound of her own breath. "What do you want from me?" One of the Aswang stepped forward, its eyes glowing brighter now, almost burning with a fiery intensity. It was a woman, or had once been, with dark hair tangled around her face and a cruel, twisted smile that sent a shiver through the Babaeng Panday. She could see the hunger in the creature's eyes, but there was something else, something old and ancient, as if this creature had seen countless lives and had come to understand far more than it should have. "We want what was promised," the Aswang said, its voice a rasp, like the sound of dry leaves scraping against stone. "What was taken from us? What you and your ancestors have hidden." The word sent a jolt of realization through the Babaeng Panday. The Aswang didn't just want to destroy her people, they wanted the power her ancestors had bound away. The power of the earth itself. The pact that had been broken was not just an agreement to coexist. It was a bargain for the control of something far greater, something that could tip the balance of life and death. And now, the Aswang wanted it back. Her mind raced. She had to stop them. But how? What could she do against creatures who had been bound by ancient magic, creatures who seemed to understand the very forces that had shaped the world? Before she could think further, the creature lunged at her, its claws sharp and glinting in the dim light. She barely had time to react, raising her sword just in time to block the blow. The impact sent a shockwave through her arm, and she gritted her teeth against the pain. This wasn't just a battle for survival anymore. It was a battle for control of something far more dangerous than either of them could fully comprehend. The aswang rolled, its voice dripping with malice. "You are too late, Babaeng Panday. You cannot stop what has already begun." And with that, the creature's claws raked across her chest, leaving deep gashes that burned like fire. As the darkness closed in around her, the Babaeng Panday realized the true fight had only just begun. To be continued. The Babaeng Panday staggered back as the claws of the aswang slashed across her chest, the burning pain nearly knocking the breath from her lungs. Her grip on her sword faltered, but she clenched her teeth, refusing to fall. The creature's twisted smile widened, its eyes glowing with malicious satisfaction, as if it reveled in her suffering. "You are too weak," the aswang hissed, its voice dripping with venom. "The power is beyond your reach, Babaeng Panday. Your people were never meant to control it, they only delayed the inevitable." The words hit her like a punch to the gut, and for a moment, doubt crept into her mind. Could she really stop them? Could she protect the village from something this powerful? Her body ached, her mind clouded with confusion and fear, but one thing remained clear: she had to fight. For the villagers. For the blood of her ancestors. With a deep breath, she gathered the strength to raise her sword once more, feeling the cool steel in her hand, the weight of it grounding her. The aswang leaped toward her again, its claws poised to tear her apart, but this time, she was ready. She sidestepped at the last moment, narrowly avoiding the blow, and thrust her blade toward the creature's side. The sword met its target, but it didn't pierce as deeply as she'd hoped. The aswang snarled, pushing her back with unnatural strength, sending her crashing to the ground. She fought to rise, every muscle in her body screaming in protest, but the aswang was on her in an instant. It crouched low, its sharp teeth bared, and for a moment, the Babaeng Panday thought her end had come. The creature's hot breath wafted over her, a putrid stench that made her stomach turn, and she could see its hunger in its eyes. It was only a matter of time before it tore into her flesh, before the battle was lost. But then, something shifted. Memory, long buried, flickered in her mind, the way her father had spoken of the sword he had forged. He'd always said it was more than just a weapon. It was a key, a symbol of the pact between her people and the ancient magic. A weapon designed to keep the balance, to guard against forces that threatened to tear the world apart. She had never fully understood those words until now. The aswang hesitated, sensing something had changed. It snarled, as though trying to summon more power, but the Babaeng Panday could feel it too. The sword in her hand was alive with energy, pulsing with a force that she had never experienced. It was as though the blade itself recognized the danger, awakened the very blood that ran through her veins. She wasn't just fighting with her own strength anymore. She was fighting with the strength of every warrior, every protector who had come before her. Her fingers tightened around the hilt, and without thinking, she thrust the sword forward again, this time with all the force she could muster. The aswang howled as the blade cut deep into its side, but there was something different about this strike. The creature's form seemed to ripple, its skin shifting as though it were made of shadows. The pain was real, but the creature's power seemed to bend, as though the blow had hit more than just flesh, it had struck at something deeper, something ancient. The aswang staggered back, snarling in frustration. It was hurt, but it wasn't defeated. Not yet. The creature's eyes burned brighter, more furious than ever, and it began to chant in language the Babaeng Panday couldn't understand. The air around them seemed to warp, the ground beneath her feet trembling as the creature summoned the power that had been locked away for so long. But she couldn't let up. She couldn't afford to hesitate. The Aswang were more than just monsters. They were creatures of magic, born of darkness, and bound to it if they regained full control of the power that had been buried beneath the earth. Everything she had fought for would be lost. The village. The people. Her very existence. As the Aswang gathered its strength, she felt the familiar presence of the woman in black, the one who had warned her earlier, lingering at the edges of her senses. The figure had vanished, but somehow, she knew it hadn't left. It was watching. Waiting. What was it? A friend? An enemy? Or something else entirely? The Babaeng Panday didn't have time to figure it out. She had only one chance to stop the creature before it became too powerful. Her chest heaved as she gasped for breath, her mind a whirlwind of thoughts and strategies. She couldn't beat it with strength alone. She had to outthink it, outmaneuver it, and deep down, she knew she had to tap into the magic of the sword, the magic that had been passed down through her bloodline. With every ounce of willpower she had left, she pushed herself to her feet, her sword now glowing with a faint, ethereal light. The blade seemed to hum in her hand, as though it had come alive, resonating with the energy around her. The Aswang paused, sensing the shift in power, and for the first time, the creature looked uncertain. But the moment was fleeting. The Aswang howled in fury, its body writhing and twisting as it prepared for its final assault. It was faster now, more vicious. The Babaeng Panday could feel the pressure of the moment building, the weight of the decision bearing down on her. She had no choice. She had to strike now, or everything would be lost. In a flash of movement, she lunged forward, sword aimed directly at the Aswang's heart. The creature screamed, its claws swiping at her in desperate attempt to stop her. The world seemed to slow as she felt the magic of the sword surge through her, the blade locking onto its target with a force that shook her to her core. And then, a deafening crack split the air. To be continued. The deafening crack rang out through the clearing, and for a brief moment, everything went silent. The sword, glowing with an otherworldly light, had struck its target. The Aswang screeched in agony, its body convulsing, its form flickering as though the very fabric of reality couldn't hold it together. The Babaeng Panday stood frozen, breathless, as the creature crumpled to the ground. Her heart hammered in her chest, the victory within her grasp. But as she watched the Aswang writhe, a strange feeling began to rise in her. Something wasn't right. The creature's body was dissolving, its shape shifting, melting into the ground like smoke. And then, just as she thought it was over, she saw it, shadow, dark and powerful, rising from the remains of the Aswang. It wasn't the creature itself, but something more, something ancient, something that had been hiding within it all along. The creature had been nothing more than a vessel, shell to carry the true force of destruction. The ground beneath her feet trembled again, but this time it wasn't just the force of battle, it was as though the earth itself was reacting to the presence of this new entity. The air turned thick with an unnatural heaviness, and she could feel her breath becoming shallow, her movements sluggish. It was as if the very essence of the world was being drained, drawn toward something darker than the Aswang itself. She took a step back, her sword still clutched in her hands, but she no longer felt the same connection to it. The blade, once glowing with fierce light, now seemed dim, as though it were losing its power, its magic fading in the face of this new, terrifying presence. She tried to steady herself, tried to fight the panic creeping up her throat, but every instinct within her screamed to run. The shadow loomed larger, and out of the smoke emerged a figure, tall, imposing, with eyes that burned like the sun, casting an eerie light on everything around it. It was no longer an aswang, but something far older, far more dangerous. The being stood motionless, its gaze fixed on the babaeng panday. Her heart lurched in her chest as she realized what she was seeing. This was the true force behind the aswang, the ancient power that had been awakened. It had been waiting, hidden in the depths of the earth, bound Ila the very magic her ancestors had used to seal it away. And now, it was free. The figure spoke, its voice deep and resonant, vibrating in her very bones. "You think you've defeated the aswang?" it asked, a low chuckle echoing in the clearing. "Foolish child. The aswang were only my servants. You have unleashed something far worse." The babaeng panday's legs trembled, but she forced herself to stand tall. She gritted her teeth, trying to muster the courage to face this new threat. "Who are you?" she demanded, her voice steady despite the fear clawing at her insides. The figure's lips curled into a cruel smile. "I am the darkness your ancestors feared. I am the power they tried to bind. The aswang were created to guard me, to keep the balance. But you've broken that balance. And now, the world will return to its true state." The weight of those words hit her like a physical blow. She realized then that this was no mere creature of the night, it was something far older, far more powerful. The aswang were merely the tip of the iceberg. This was a being of pure, unfiltered darkness, a force that had once ruled the land before being sealed away by her ancestors in desperate attempt to preserve the world. And now, it had been set loose. But there was something more, something in the figure's tone that unsettled her. It wasn't just mocking her for her failure, there was a flicker of something else. A recognition. An acknowledgement of her bloodline. The creature knew who she was, what she was. And that could only mean one thing: she had a part to play in this. She steadied her sword once again, her fingers numb from the tension. If the magic in the blade was fading, then she would have to find another way to stop this creature. But what could she do against a being like this? Her heart raced as she realized the stakes. This wasn't just a fight for survival anymore. This was a battle for the fate of the world. "Really now?" she asked, her voice almost a whisper. "Really wake up now?" The figure tilted its head, as if pondering the question. "Because the time has come," it said, its voice now quieter, more ominous. "The seal that bound me was weakening with each passing generation. Your people may have fought valiantly, but they were never meant to defeat me. Their power was nothing compared to the darkness I possess. And now, the balance is tipping. The world is ready for its rightful ruler." As the figure spoke, the air grew colder, and the ground beneath her feet seemed to shift, as though it were alive. She could feel the earth groaning, the trees trembling, as if the very land was aligning itself with the creature's words. This wasn't just a battle for survival, it was a battle for the very nature of the world itself. The babaeng panday's mind raced, but all she could think of was the ancient power her ancestors had sealed away. The sword, the symbols on the altar, everything was connected. But how? How could she tap into that power when the sword no longer responded to her? Her thoughts were jumbled, and the longer she hesitated, the more the world around her seemed to buckle under the pressure of the creature's presence. The ground rumbled again, more violently this time, and a crack appeared in the earth, glowing with an eerie light. From within it, she could feel something stirring, something dark and alive, stretching toward her, hungry for release. The creature in front of her was not just a physical threat, it was the harbinger of something much worse. "You've come too far to turn back now," the figure said softly, almost affectionately. And you will never be able to undo what you've started. And as the earth cracked open beneath her feet, she realized that the battle for her life had just become the battle for the very future of her world. To be continued. The Babaeng Panday stared at the woman in black, the weight of her words sinking in. The earth beneath her feet still hummed with the lingering magic, a reminder that the battle was far from over. She had destroyed one Aswang, severed the creature's physical form, but the true darkness, the one her ancestors had sealed away, was still watching, still waiting. It wasn't just a monster to be defeated. It was a force, a cycle, one that would keep coming back, no matter how many times it was struck down. The woman in black stepped closer, her expression unreadable, yet there was a glimmer of something deeper in her eyes. You've done what you had to do. The Aswang were never the real enemy. They were just the beginning, a small part of a larger plan. What you've faced was nothing compared to what's still out there. Her voice softened as she added, but you've also learned something today, haven't you? The Babaeng Panday felt a shiver run down her spine, her mind swirling with the weight of the woman's words. She nodded slowly, the exhaustion settling in, but with it, a sense of clarity. I understand now, she said quietly. This fight, it doesn't end here. The magic is older than anything I knew. Lily ancestors, they didn't just protect us from the Aswang. They were trying to stop something much darker. The woman nodded, her lips curling into a sad smile. You were always meant to be the guardian, but there's a difference between defending the world and shaping its future. The darkness will return, but not as a single enemy. It will return in the hearts of those who seek to control it. The Babaeng Panday stood up straighter, her resolve growing. I will be ready. I'll keep fighting. You will, the woman agreed. But know this, you won't fight alone. You never have. Her eyes flickered to the ground where the Aswang's remains had been scattered. You have the strength of your ancestors with you. And the sword, though it may seem weak now, still holds power. But you must learn to wield it differently. Not as a weapon, but as a key. The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. The Babaeng Panday felt the weight of them sink into her heart, a truth she hadn't fully realized until now. It wasn't the sword that would win the battle, it was the knowledge of how to wield it, how to tap into the true power that lay beyond her understanding. The sword wasn't just a tool of destruction, it was a bridge to something much older, something much more powerful than she had ever imagined. The woman in black gave her a long, steady look, her gaze seeming to pierce into the very soul of the Babaeng Panday. There will be more trials, more battles, more temptations to stray from your path. But remember this, the darkness that seeks to corrupt the world isn't always an external force. Sometimes, it lies within us all, waiting for the right moment to break free. The Babaeng Panday didn't respond immediately. She stood silently, her thoughts heavy with the weight of what had just transpired. Her world had shifted in an instant. Everything she thought she knew about the Aswang, about her ancestors, about her role in the world, had been turned upside down. She wasn't just a warrior, she was a keyholder, a protector of an ancient magic that spanned generations. Her responsibility was greater than she had ever realized. The woman in black gave her a final nod, as if satisfied with their exchange. You are not alone in this fight. Remember that. Trust those who stand by you, even when the road ahead seems uncertain. Together, you can face what's coming. But alone you may fall. And with that, the woman turned, vanishing into the shadows as if she had never been there. The clearing fell silent again, but the Babaeng Panday could still feel the echoes of her presence, the weight of her words hanging in the air like a warning. The Babaeng Panday took deep breath, letting the tension slowly ebb from her body. She turned to look at the village in the distance, its lights flickering like teeny beacons in the night. It was peaceful for now, but she knew better than to think that peace would last forever. There would be other threats, other enemies. And she would have to face them, not with strength alone, but with wisdom and deep understanding of the power she now carried. She glanced down at the sword in her hand, the once bright blade now dull and worn. It was no longer the weapon she had relied on for so long, it was something more, something that would require her to grow, to learn, and to become more than just the protector she had been. The path ahead wasn't clear, but she was ready for it. She had to be. With one final look at the stillness of the clearing, she turned and began the journey back to her village, her heart filled with both fear and hope. The darkness was never truly gone. But neither was the light. She was the bridge between them now, the one who could bring balance, or let it fall. The choice was hers. And as the first light of dawn began to break over the horizon, the Babaeng Panday knew that her fight had only just begun. The shadows would always rise again, but as long as she stood, the world would never be consumed. Not while she still had breath to fight. The end for now.